Wolfspeed's gross margin is negative 17.4%. Not operating margin. Gross margin. It costs more to make the product than customers pay for it. Now look at who it competes with. On Semiconductor, plus 42.7. Infineon, plus 41.2. STMicro, plus 34.3. Same industry. Same chips. A 60-point gap between Wolfspeed and the next name over. And here's what makes it interesting rather than just bad. Wolfspeed is the one that already finished the factory upgrade the others are still racing to complete. I'm Big Z. Let's take this one apart. We covered Wolfspeed once before, when it went bankrupt. Quick recap, because this is the sequel. Pre-packaged Chapter 11 filed June 30, 2025, out again by September 29, 13 weeks. What it got: debt cut roughly 70%, maturities pushed to 2030, annual cash interest down about 60%, call it $62 million a year that stopped leaving the building. What it cost: the old shareholders. Legacy equity was exchanged at a ratio of 0.008352 new shares per old share. Roughly one new share for every 120. They ended up with about 3 to 5% of the company. And one warning before any chart you've seen: every price from before September 29 is not comparable to today's. Everything I quote is post-emergence only. Here's the thing bankruptcy is good at, and the thing it can't touch. A restructuring is a balance sheet event. It moves debt. It cannot move demand. Wolfspeed came out with a genuinely repaired balance sheet, 70% less debt, 5 years of runway on maturities, 60% less interest. If the problem had been leverage, the problem would now be solved. But look at what the fiscal third quarter, reported in May, actually showed. Revenue $150 million. Down 19% year over year. Gross margin still negative. And the guidance for the following quarter, revenue of $140 to $160 million, with the company saying plainly that non-GAAP gross margin would remain negative, and naming the reason itself: underutilization across the manufacturing footprint. That's the whole story in one word. Not obsolescence. Not a product failure. Underutilization. Now the part almost nobody gives them credit for. Silicon carbide is moving from 150mm wafers to 200. Bigger wafer, more chips per wafer, lower cost per chip, the most important cost transition in this industry, and Chinese 8-inch capacity has forced every Western player to rush it. Wolfspeed already finished. It shut down 150mm device production at Durham ahead of schedule and moved everything to the Mohawk Valley 200mm fab. As of the last report, about 90% of its power revenue comes off that 200mm line. Split the quarter: power products roughly $100 million, materials roughly $50 million. So the technology roadmap, the thing that's genuinely hard, genuinely capital intensive, and genuinely years long, is done. They have the modern fab. They just don't have enough orders to fill it. This is why the gross margin is negative, and it's worth being precise. A semiconductor fab is almost entirely fixed cost. Building, tools, clean room, staff, those bills arrive whether you run one wafer or 10,000. Revenue scales with volume. Cost mostly doesn't. So at $150 million a quarter through a footprint built for far more, every wafer carries overhead it can't cover. That's a negative 17% gross margin. Double the volume and most of that cost barely moves. The operating leverage here is enormous in both directions. That's the actual investment question with this company. Not, is silicon carbide real? It is. Not, is the technology good? It's ahead. The question is narrower and harder: does the volume show up before the cash does not? And now the strangest month this stock has had. April 30th, Wolfspeed closed at $29.53. During May it traded to an intra-month high of $80.70, up 173%. What changed at the company in those 4 weeks? Nothing. No new guidance. No disclosed order. No earnings. What changed was a Substack note. Citrini Research argued that 300mm silicon carbide is becoming a mechanical necessity for next-generation, power-hungry AI data center clusters. Be fair to that argument, it's serious. AI power management genuinely is emerging as a demand engine, and I can't tell you it's wrong. But be clear what it is, a third-party thesis, not company guidance, and not $1 of disclosed revenue. On May 27 the stock fell 19.6% in a single session, momentum unwind, profit-taking, and renewed attention on restructuring shares coming free to be resold. Today it's $23. 71% below the May high, and slightly below where it first traded leaving bankruptcy. 173% up and 71% down, with no change in revenue in between. That is not a market arguing about Wolfspeed's quarter. That's a market arguing about which of two futures to price, and flipping between them inside 90 days. Future 1, silicon carbide demand recovers, AI power builds a second leg, the 200mm fab fills, and a company with a fixed cost base and a $1.2 billion market cap re-rates violently. Future 2, EV demand stays soft, Chinese 8-inch capacity keeps compressing prices, utilization never arrives, and a business losing money on every sale burns through its fresh balance sheet. Both futures are live. Neither was resolved in May. What actually happened is that the option got repriced twice on the same information. So which future is winning? The evidence genuinely cuts both ways. Against, the EV slowdown is real and it's the core end market. Chinese producers are scaling 8-inch capacity while cutting 6-inch pricing, that created 6-inch substrate oversupply and sustained price pressure. Meanwhile 150mm substrate prices fall even as raw material costs push bulk silicon carbide prices up. A squeeze from both ends. 4. 800-volt vehicle architectures are standardizing, and 800 volts effectively requires silicon carbide in the traction inverter and onboard charger. Porsche, Hyundai, Kia and Lucid deployed it across 2024 and 2025, and General Motors is rolling 800 volts across the entire Ultium range in 2026. Third-party forecasts put the silicon carbide wafer market at $2.2 billion in 2026 growing to $10.3 billion by 2033. Treat that as a forecast, not a fact. The technology is not in question. The timing is the entire trade. So here's my call, and it's deliberately narrow. Wolfspeed is not a turnaround story. It's a capacity utilization option, and it should be judged like one. A turnaround implies a stable base that improves. Wolfspeed has no stable base, a modern fab, a repaired balance sheet, negative gross margins, revenue still falling 19%. What it has is asymmetry. At $1.2 billion it's about 1% the size of Infineon. If utilization turns, the leverage on a fixed-cost fab is extreme. If it doesn't, those same fixed costs work against it just as hard. And the point most people skip, the restructuring bought time on the debt schedule, not on the income statement. Different clocks. Maturities run to 2030. Gross margin is negative now. Each of these is checkable in a filing. 1. Gross margin crossing 0. That's the cleanest single proof utilization has turned. The company has guided it to stay negative through the fiscal fourth quarter. The quarter it goes positive is the quarter the thesis changes. 2. Quarterly revenue near $200 million. That's my threshold, not the company's, derived from the 140 to 60 guide plus their own underutilization language. Below it, the 200mm footprint stays a burden. Above it, it becomes the asset it was built to be. 3. Where the share count settles. Roughly 45 to 52 million shares, still moving as escrow tranches release, with Renesas holding 38.7%. Until it stops moving, the overhang stays. Catalyst, the fiscal fourth quarter report in August, the first test of whether that May narrative shows up as an actual order. The strongest argument on the other side. If the AI power thesis is right, if next-generation data center clusters really do pull silicon carbide into high-volume power delivery, then Wolfspeed owns finished 200mm capacity at the exact moment demand inflects, with a clean balance sheet and a market cap under $2 billion. That is a genuinely asymmetric setup, and it's why the May move happened at all. I'd also note the technology execution deserves more respect than the stock implies. Shutting Durham early and moving 90% of power revenue onto 200mm is not what a broken company looks like. Operationally, they did the hard thing. My hesitation isn't the thesis. It's the sequence. You need the orders before you need the story, and right now the order book is producing a negative gross margin. Wolfspeed is the clearest example I know of a company that fixed the wrong problem, not because it chose wrong, but because bankruptcy can only fix one kind of problem. Debt, solved. Technology, ahead of its competitors. Demand, unresolved. And an income statement that still loses money on every unit shipped. So watch the gross margin line, watch for 200 million a quarter, and watch the share count settle. Those three tell you which future you're in, and none of them require you to guess. If you want the industry context, our silicon carbide episode covers the whole field, on STMicro, Infineon and how Wolfspeed got here. I'm Big Z, follow me, see you in the next deep dive.